Hi, I'm Debra from the Property Frontline.
And I'm John Gilmovich from Real Property Manager, and welcome to Property Mythbusters, where we debunk some of the confusion and contradictory information in the property buying space. And today's episode is going to be around the effects of the recent federal election that we had and its effects on property from a sales point of view and from a rental point of view. Okay, so let's take a look at what can happen post a federal election outcome, no matter what outcome it is. Of course, government policy and any change of policy can affect on the tenancy front. Now, we've had quite a lot of changes recently, and of course, most of the legislation is not federally based, it's state-based. So all our states run their own race as far as tenancy legislation is concerned. Though they're quite similar to each other, there are some very intricate differences that can affect residential and, of course, our retail tenancies. When a federal election, during their campaign, there's a lot of discussion. It's one of the hot topics. Housing is being discussed. I guess at the end of the day, the federal sort of level on-flow effect down to the states triggers the states to have a look at their bills and legislation. So it starts off as a bill, that's the proposal of new legislation. And that gets put on the table for stakeholders to discuss. And the stakeholders being, of course, the government, and then you've got the private sector of people like the tenants union, and then you've got the landlords associations as well to debate some of the intricacies of the proposed legislation that could affect how tenants live and how landlords and their properties manage those tenancies. So without going into too much detail, because we've only got about 15 minutes to discuss this, Debra, retail and residential tenancies is something that's come up recently for, in particular, New South Wales. Just about every other state in Australia has already had their change, especially the Eastern Seaboard, in Queensland and in Victoria. The legislation has been updated and it's pretty much done and dusted. So there are some proposals for New South Wales. We'll have a look at that in a sec, but that's one of the effects, the on-flow effects post a federal election. Of course, planning policies can change, and we've seen that already, in particular here in New South Wales with, for example, the Affordable Housing State Planning SEP, as we call it, the SEPP. We've seen major change already gone through that, affecting the development and the management of the affordable housing sector. Also, building codes can get updated in the planning instruments, as well as strata legislation, strata community living, and that other niche space at the moment, co-living as well. So we're now seeing that trickling through down to New South Wales, and proposal papers being put on the table and being discussed. So really, the federal vibe, as we call it, the federal election vibe, can have on-flow effects on, the state regulations and the development of new policies, and they change depending on which political party you're going to be voting for, and of course taxes. The proposal for taxational changes, and we've just seen that example in the last 24 hours with the New South Wales state budget last night, putting a new land tax policy on the table for discussion. In fact, they're wanting to push it through, this particular optional opt-in, opt-out land tax. This is a historical moment now, with the very first taxational change for property buyers in decades. So that's something that's occurred as a result of the political sort of flavour of accessibility into housing from a federal level point of view down to the state level. So what affects, especially, this situation with housing affordability and rental stress, and of course, this new focus from the media on the cost of living is very, very crucial part of any sort of lead up to an election, because you can see here by the statistics here, renters make up about 40% of the votes out there, and that's quite substantial. So you got 40% of rental tenants out there. Some of these under some rental stress at the moment, in particular those marginal seats, as we call them. And across all those states, you can see how tenants can influence and government can influence the decision to vote for a particular party when, the policies favour either the tenant or the landlord. So you can have a swing vote very, very easily if there's a proposal on the table that favours, or I guess will make the cost of living and tenancies more easier for the tenant in particular. So you can see how, for example, the tenants' union plays out during an election by running, kind of campaigns around rental stress and tenants being evicted and people living in caravans. And I know these are all extreme examples. They're probably not the norm, but there's probably a section of the community that will say, you know what, I'm going to vote for this party because their policy makes more sense than the current government, and you can swing the voter across to a new party. So in particular, just recently here in Sydney, a member for Newtown, which happens to be a Greens Party member, has put a new bill on the table for discussion called the Residential Tenancy Flood Protection Bill. There are certain proposals there. It's a private member's bill, which means that it's a particular member there, generally Leung, who's pursuing this. It might not be the pursuits of the wider Greens Party, or in particular Labor Party, who sides with the Greens as their particular policy. Certainly that's to be debated, but this particular bill could be problematic for both tenants and landlords if it does get through, because it's got some harsh and sort of conscionable legislation in it. For example, big fines for landlords who breach tenancies, rent control measures of capping rent increases to CPI, stopping no cause evictions, what we call the no grounds notices. There's a whole myriad of things there that could be seen as a bit harsh and conscionable for any property investor to fathom or own a property, and that could in effect cause a bit of a rental crisis, if you like, in Sydney if the private sector, for example, the private landlords, the mums and dads, withdraw their properties from the marketplace, or we stop building them or developing them, or they go into different regulatory environments such as Airbnb, short-term lettings, which is less controlled and gives them a better return.
And of course, that's what we're seeing right across the country, aren't we?
Yeah. So we're seeing that in Queensland now, as some of you may have seen a couple of articles floating around, where a local Brisbane council has now penalised, or is about to penalise, private landlords and tax them a higher rate on their council rates for withdrawing their properties from the general rental market and going to lesser regulatory environments such as short-term holiday lettings. And as we know, there's a bit of a rental crisis in Brisbane in particular at the moment, with less than 1% vacancy rates. So it can have a detrimental effect. So change of policy, change of regulation, change of planning laws when a new government steps in and pushes the states to change their policies, can have both positive and very negative effects on the rental market. So Debra, that's in a nutshell what can occur on the rental side of things post-election time.
Okay, thanks for that, John. What I'll do is take it from the side of my side of the fence, which is the strategy and the buying side. What I've done with my review is I've looked at what the federal Labor housing policies were. So federal Labor said that they were basing their housing impacts on around about 5 key components of their housing policy. So the first one is they're introducing this thing called the Housing Australia Future Fund, which will set aside $10 billion to build 30,000 homes, more affordable government homes, over 5 years for people who are experiencing hardship and can't afford to rent elsewhere. And of course, while it's great in the planning, we know that it's not going to even scratch the surface to meet the need. And so my view is that, of course, we really need to do more of that. And so private landlords still need to be in the mix in a big way. Otherwise, we're just going to continue to have more of a rental crisis, and it's going to push prices up, more hardship. Private landlords should be encouraged to continue to offer their properties to the market. Anyway, the impact on this Labor policy, I believe, is better than nothing, but it's not going to really help. So the second component of the housing policy is they're going to introduce more funding for housing in the Northern Territory, 100 million for essential housing. And of course, this is something that the Liberal Party didn't really give too much of a priority to. And clearly, federal Labor is making this a big focus. And of course, we really should be doing much more in that way, or to help people in need in the Northern Territory. So I'm all for that. So I just hope they hurry up and make it happen. The third component of their housing policy was they're going to set up this new council called the National Housing Supply and Affordability Council, but it's going to sit over the top of a really good, I think they call it the council, National Housing and Finance and Investment Corporation, is NEFIC. So the Liberals set that up as a way to focus on housing affordability, diversity, and working on decreasing homelessness. And they did a really good job, but it seems that Labor is going to put something over the top of that. And really, I just see that as more bureaucracy. Why couldn't they just beef up something that was already there? It's more political than it is strategic. And so he's hoping they just give more jobs to more public servants, shuffling papers. I hope I haven't offended anybody. Not that all public servants shuffle papers, but, like, why have all these duplicate activities? Then the fourth and the fifth component of the policy, these two are quite similar. There's the Help to Buy, which is supposed to help, or shared ownership scheme. Yeah, for 10,000 people, buyers per year in the cities, and then I think there's another 10,000 for regional. We've all got issues with this. Sure, people need help, and so here's hoping. I think it's okay to run a pilot on it, but it will probably cause lots of mess further down the track. It means that the government, owns half your home, and if you wanted to sell it at the end, it's going to be messy. Anyway, full marks.
And you potentially have to buy them out as well if you want full ownership.
Yeah, there is. We don't know yet what the impacts of this will be on the negative side, but if it does mean that people have more control over their housing, that's a good thing. Then after Labor got in, which is only a few weeks ago. Now we're already starting to see these ripple policies with the state governments reacting and, joining the bandwagon, because now we're going to be rolling through a series of state elections. So the first component of the ripple policy is still tied to federal Labor, because they said that they would support Liberal policy where owners can add in an extra $300,000 to their super, as long as the finances are from the sale of a home. And so, that's great, but what's my comment on that? It's good. It's really not going to have much of an impact on supply, which is what this initiative was supposed to try and help. So this is more around a lot of governments focus on trying to get older residents to sell up their properties closer to the city and move, I don't know, to their dream home on the beach in Queensland.
Sunshine Coast.
Yeah. And the fact of the issue is you can't encourage older residents to move just with money. They usually want to stay where they are.
Yes.
Because, their friends are there. So
they're close to their family, they're close to their medical centres, might be getting treatment and
health.
Health. Yeah. There's a lot to consider.
Yeah.
And of course, generational wealth being passed. Yeah.
That's right. A lot of them will just hang on because it's going to be their gift to the family. So the issue, to get older residents to move out, it can't be leveraged with just money. It really has to be done with a couple of other approaches, one of which is supply. So, let's build, while I don't want to see high-rise everywhere, we should be using our land close in our cities a little bit more efficiently, so that these residents have somewhere that they can go, so they're still local. Anyway, that's my view.
Yeah, it sounds like we need more retirement village type communities getting built.
Well, does it have to be a retirement village? Why can't they just be more user-friendly apartments, not these tiny little one-bedroom, things where you can't swing a cat?
Yeah.
So
yeah.
Different.
Yeah, maybe where they have like for like sort of almost like the co-living concept without co-living, where you have like-minded people of the same age and sort of sharing, if you like, that community space.
Yeah, co-living without the rip-offs. Yeah.
Correct. Yeah.
Right, and so the second policy, federal Labor has come out saying that they support New South Wales changing from a big stamp duty tax and transitioning to a long-term land tax. I don't really want to say too much there, but really it's
maybe that would be another episode.
That would be another episode. It's a ruse. It's just going to, I think, cause more problems for first-time buyers, in that they'll have to pay more for the property that they're buying, because there'll be more finances, because people are thinking, I won't have to pay stamp duty, and the government will control their house. They'll have less control. Then the third policy is New South Wales taking notes out of the federal election. There was a big message there from the Teals saying they wanted more work to be done on a range of different issues, including housing. And so New South Wales is also introducing a shared ownership scheme. So all of this, summing it up, what impacts will this have on housing and prices? it's really skimming around the edges. It's causing uncertainty. So people are like stepping back, trying to get their bearings, but really the market's just going to power on. And so this is like a little different view about the impacts of the federal election, because not only did we have a change in our government, really this is about the other impacts that have happened in the past 4 weeks and what it feels like from the buying side. So last month we saw the RBA move and they increased the cash rate, and then it really seemed to have a bigger effect this month when they increased the cash rate by 0.5%. And why is that? I think it was because people went, oh, the RBA is really serious now. They're trying to get that inflation genie back in the bottle. But look at this. So we've got inflation. We've got the RBA concerned about increasing house prices, like all of us are concerned about that. So the RBA has increased their cash rate, but globally, because most major banks are working on increasing their cash rates, it's actually caused a share market drop. And when that happens, like big shocks in the share market, then people go to gold and to housing. So it's pushed kind of the house price issue off the top line. And now people are like, oh my God, all this uncertainty. So it pushes people back to safety.
The safety nets, yeah.
Yeah. And so share market drops. So then we don't know, but you would expect that the RBA is going to feel this pressure to slow down their increases, and we'll have the property market does continue to power on. What I'm actually seeing is a flattening of the market. So there's some areas where we will see big dips, and guess where they're going to be? In the areas where first-time buyers are buying. So all of those new houses that are built on tiny little blocks property. But like in the city, established homes, they're still holding up. So from a dip perspective, yeah, the first-time buyers will feel it. So they're buying, like they're paying like $1 million for a block of land.
45 kilometres from the city.
Yeah.
CBD.
And then they've got to put a house on that. That is the area that's going to be impacted by the market change, whereas your established homes are still, if anything, they will just maintain their pricing until it starts to move again. So, yeah, that is my view. So wrapping up, there has been quite a few changes already, and the initial impact has just been people like stepping back to see what's going to play out until they figure out where things are going, and then we'll be sort of back into spring and back hard at it, I think, from a buying perspective. From the rental side, John?
Rental sides, I think more was a post-COVID reaction than the federal election reaction. So the returns are definitely improving, as in rents are increasing slowly. There was kind of the first sort of wave that kind of took off. It's neutralizing. I think it's neutralizing now. In some places, where, for example, like the Brisbane city market, where vacancies are below 1%, they're starting to feel the pressure. Feel the pressure there because it just hasn't been enough stock, and supply for the demand that occurred the last 3 or 4 years.
Queensland government has spent all that time disincentivising or pushing landlords out there.
Yes, that's very true. And there it is there, how policy or change of policy or updated policies that can have negative effects on supply can have adverse effects on the demand side.
Yeah.
With tenants paying high rates as the onslow effect. There's cause and effect, as we call it, with policy change. So that's hopefully brought some perspective of how a federal election or any election can have impacts on the property markets.
Yeah. Okay. Alrighty. Well, thanks for watching. If you've got questions for us, you can contact John at
realpropertymanager.com.au
and me at Debra at propertyfrontline.com.au, and you can also visit our websites or send us through questions via email. Time to go. Bye.
See you at the next Mythbusters.